Origin Chess, home Rex, and this is Chinese troops deployed to Poland's border. This was on task and purpose. Here's another rosy news. China suddenly decided to be more active thing. I'm sure this is just like not direct aggression, like something like, oh, military exercise, this and that. But come on, really? Poland's border, I'm guessing Belarus or something, right? Everybody was saying like China isn't stupid. I got the comment as well, like China is a strategic partner to USA. China isn't stupid. China's not going to do this, right? China's only supplying Russia and trying to debt trap them or whatever. China's not going to get involved. So what the fuck is this then? Of course China's also going to get involved. It just works perfectly for them, right? The world is more in chaos. They can do their own thing with Taiwan and things. It's just common sense at that point. So I kind of seen that this coming the first time, like Russia and China alliance started after the Ukraine war. I'm like, yeah, I see where this is going. Same with North Korea. So the new axis is forming. Is that it? Russia, China, North Korea, God knows who else, right? Versus, yeah, world war scenarios are, I guess, starting up. Again, somebody might be thinking, okay, aren't you like, like really exaggerating? Aren't you like, worrying too much? Yeah, but we thought the same thing before the Ukraine thing. Like, oh, come on, like troops on the borders, probably nothing, just like scare tactic. It wasn't, right? With everything's happening, like that's the thing. Thing exponentially gets, bigger and bigger. Same things applying here. You don't know like how fast major wars are gonna break out, and before you know it, just by economic standpoint or like whatever, it's a world war now. Everybody has to join in type of shit. Right, that's just fucked up, right? I saw the comment where somebody said like, born too late to witness the, like Apollo missions and like space race and whatever, and like born just in time to get drafted in World War III. That is so. It feels so true, isn't it? But yeah, I don't know. It's gonna be interesting video. Let's watch it. Remember, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, so that way I know which type of videos to react to more. I like watching Task and Purpose because it's really fast at like covering major events like this really well with proper scripting and things. So I'm guessing this is really new, ton of events like past few days or something. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. Let's do it.
In July 2024, China transported soldiers 3,000 miles away into Belarus. They conducted joint training exercises only a mile and a half away from NATO member Poland's border and 40 miles away from the border with Ukraine.
China's joint military exercises with Russia and Belarus coming just days after NATO's strongest denunciation of Beijing.
Does this mean it's time to sound the alarmist alarm? The Chinese are coming! The Chinese are coming!
The reason this has made world news headlines is because of the implication. Beijing hasn't done a mission like this since 2015, so the timing of the drill indicates that the CCP is sending a warning message to the United States that they're prepared to deploy troops to fight against NATO and Europe. Keep in mind, the United States military routinely conducts much larger training missions near the border of China and Russia.
Yeah, same shit was happening in World War I, right? The more I learn about World War I realized like why it happened, right? Everything was an excuse. Everybody's like interests were tied together. In this case, USA butting in for Taiwan and getting in the way of China. That's how China sees it. So they're like, okay, see, we're gonna get involved here if you don't back off that and whatever the fuck that is. Everybody's interest ties in, and that's the problem.
Has also recently ran a submarine mission to their allies in Cuba, right near the United States. But I think the reason this otherwise routine mission can shock people today is because of the rhetoric that we hear around it. The deputy head of the General Staff of the Belarusian Armed Forces said that the maneuvers were in response to the West's aggressive foreign policy towards Belarus and to Ukrainian provocation. Meanwhile, NATO recently met in Washington, D.C., where
they just point blank saying this is because of like, Western countries butting in to Russia and Belarus for the Ukraine thing. And that's why we did the exercise with China. China's like, okay, we're doing this subtly. Why are you directly saying that? Come on.
Released a joint statement calling China a decisive enabler of Russia's war, and that China is currently engaged in enabling the largest land war in Europe in recent history. Beijing responded saying the accusations were lies and smears, and said that the exercises weren't aimed at any single country. This sounds like the geopolitical version of high school gossip, but it begs the question:
could China actually fight a land war in Europe?
How many troops could the CCP deploy and sustain that far away from their border? To answer that, we need to take a look at three key areas of the Chinese military: strategic airlift, sea and ground transportation. But first, I want to talk to you about the folks that made this video possible, HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. HelloFresh offers over 50 different recipes. So there's basically
The problem with China trying to attack anyone in Europe, land war, the problem is that China is constantly attacking India. And India would take that as like, oh, okay, this is like appropriate time to make allies in Europe and US and basically attack China land-wise. So China can't attack anywhere else. Like type, it's a weird dynamic, right? So I don't think China's ever going to land-wise, cause war or something. Maybe through back channel where nobody kind of see it, but point blank war, no, I don't think that's going to happen. They know they're like locked with this kind of like a dynamic with India, and like they're not going to risk that, I think. Yeah, well, go to original video page link, and from there support this channel or the QR code.
discounts will apply. We'll start with strategic airlift. China sent one single Y-20 cargo plane to Belarus. For context, that's slightly smaller than the American C-17 transport, so we can actually assume that it can carry a similar amount of 188 soldiers. No tanks or armor were sent on the training exercise. According to China's Ministry of National Defense, they conducted a, quote, anti-terror training mission that included things like hostage rescue, urban combat, and water crossings. Not sure what type of terror group you're fighting where you need to train on contested river crossings, but okay, fair enough. The Y-20 has a payload capacity of 66 tons, so it can potentially carry 2 light tanks or 1 main battle tank. Since 2016, you probably haven't heard of this, but China has quietly built a fleet of 67 Y-20s. This has gotten exactly 0 attention though, because they don't do sexy things like fighters that fire off missiles, but in many ways, their strategic implication is much bigger.
Because of the implication.
China is now one of only 4 nations in the entire world to manufacture a 200-ton military transport jet. If you want to project power and fight wars abroad, acquiring this asset is the first step. This actually isn't the first time we've seen them in Europe. In April of 2022, military observers were surprised to see 6 of these Chinese Y-20s land in Nikola Tesla International Airport inside Serbia. According to the Serbian president, Beijing delivered unto him FK-3 surface-to-air missiles. These are the export variant of China's HQ-22 SAM. It's kind of like the Russian S-300. The point is, China isn't focusing their airlift to deploy troops. So far, they're mainly using it to transport weapons and equipment. China has 20 of the similar Russian-produced IL-76 cargo planes that can carry 2 lightweight armored trucks, no tanks, and 130 troops. What all that means is that with their current capabilities, China could fly 12,000 soldiers to Russia or Belarus if they absolutely needed to. That's roughly 2 brigades, but this doesn't include armored vehicles. A typical armored brigade has at least 80 main battle tanks, 18 self-propelled artillery vehicles, 150 infantry fighting vehicles.
Yeah, but would 12,000 matter, right? Like Russia has like, since start of the war, like 1 million around soldiers, like they've spent that, right? Even with just one conscription or whatever, they like use 200,000. Like numbers are insane in today's world. Would 12,000 or something matter? I mean, obviously, like it matters in a bit, but not like point blank war type of way. Like, okay, is that gonna matter? Come on.
Vehicles and 100 armored trucks and logistic vehicles. So it would take China's entire strategic airlift fleet 10 round trips to deploy 2 brigades. Moving that many troops and equipment with those assets would take over a month. But I might be being far too generous with those estimates, because I spoke with an active duty US Army officer who works in logistics in strategic airlift, and he said, quote, assuming all 67 Y-20s are available and fully mission capable, the PLA could airlift 8,978 soldiers in one go. While this is a lot of light infantry, it brings up a lot more questions. Where are they going to
Not 79, they can't jam one more, come on.
land? Every airbase and airport has a limited amount of aircraft they can realistically store, service, and maintain. This number is known as the maximum on ground and is typically measured from the aircraft's wingtips and added amount of length on each side in order to allow for the bird to maneuver on the ground. And where are all these 9,000 soldiers gonna eat, sleep, and shit? Adding all 9,000 soldiers will immediately jump the local population by an emotionally significant amount. In order for this to work, the PLA will have to painstakingly negotiate an agreement with Belarus.
See, yeah, logistics is one where everything fails. America's great at logistics, so they can do a lot of shit. But then again, like human right thing, right? Like, where they're gonna eat, whatever, like eat, sleep, whatever, who gives a fuck? Like, just send them, we'll worry about that later kind of element can also happen. I mean, yeah. People tell me like, oh, China's not communist. I mean, are you sure about that? Like, okay, what is it to be communist, right? Like if you write a book on a communism, which there are many, China will not fall in like all categories, but like communist enough. It's in their name. That's how they act like it, right? I mean, look at all the new equipment they make with the vehicles and things, right? Where the bullets gonna eject, just where like the troops can get out. Isn't that a problem? Who cares? They're just troops. So human value comes second rather than the goal. That's how China's working. So China can also like, screw it, we'll worry about that. Let's just send the troops now.
Belarus, another logistics soldier I spoke to said, quote, "The heavier you load an aircraft with cargo, the more wear and tear occurs. So you often have to trade off range for cargo capacity. Some aircraft may have to be tasked to support and recover aircraft with maintenance issues, to fly both specialists and parts to fix non-mission capable aircraft." So what he's saying is that not all those 67 Y-20s can be dedicated to just flying combat power there. You also need to dedicate some of them to support roles. But we're forgetting about a whole nother major problem before we even get there: mid-air refueling. When fully loaded, China's Y-20 has a max range that's reduced down from 7,000 kilometers to 3,700 kilometers. The closest point from Belarus to China is the capital in Xinjiang, which is 4,600 kilometers. These numbers come straight from the Chinese media publications themselves, who spoke to Zhu Chan, who's the head of their aviation industry corporation. The article claims fully loaded Y-20s would be restricted to domestic operations in China. This is why they would need mid-air refueling for many of these missions. But there's another problem. Currently, China doesn't have any major mid-air refueling capability.
Yeah, but I think Russia does, right? And like you can land in Russia even with that kind of range, right? I don't know. Pretty sure you can. The graph there he just saw, I'm pretty sure Russia is part of that range. So they can land somewhere in Russia, refuel and moving on. Like, they're going to be like allied with Russia if they do any kind of war like that. I mean, that's the whole point. So I don't know. That could work joint thing with Russia. I don't know. And like I said, like troops things, where they're going to eat, where they're going to sleep. They can say like, okay, we'll figure it out later. And China is strong at that, right? Like look at how fast they can build hospitals and things in just few days. So they can like, okay, send troop now. And like we'll think about everything, like where they're going to sleep and all that, like food, we'll worry about that later and like figure it out later. China can't do that. Right? You can dunk on China all you want, but China does have its strengths, and this could be one of them. Who knows?
Like the 400 refueler tankers that America currently has. They just started manufacturing versions of the Y-20, the U variant, for refueling. China also doesn't have any of the giant American C-5 or Russian AN-124 cargo aircraft, which can carry twice the capacity at 140 tons, so they can carry 2 tanks instead of 1. What all of this means is that China's current airlift capacity would struggle to support a limited war in Europe. The assessment is backed up by the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, which was created by the United States Congress to research the Chinese military. Among other things, they state that in their report on China's power projection, quote, "In the medium term, next 10 to 15 years or so by like 2035, the People's Liberation Army aims to be capable of fighting a limited war overseas to protect its interest in countries participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. By mid-century, though, the PLA aims to be capable of rapidly deploying forces anywhere in the world." Roger Cliff wrote a great publication titled China's Future Military Capabilities for the U.S. Army War College. In it, he stated, "China's Air Force does not currently appear to be aiming to become a global power projection force. The acquisition of aerial refueling aircraft appears to be a lesser priority. The PLA Air Force does not yet possess heavy bombers, and the acquisition..."
See, that changes things, which means like they have no interest. That shows that they have no interest in any like global conflict at larger distances. Maybe around their place, like Taiwan, India, places like that. Maybe they're focusing on that more rather than like worrying about Europe or US or something. US is like basically in Americas, like both sides that are sea, North Canada, South Mexico. So everything they're going to have to do is probably overseas. So they like invest a lot in navies with aircraft carriers and things, and it makes sense. So USA has that like capability, basically do war wherever they want. It's a strength in itself. China doesn't have that. China is not really looking for that. So I don't know. To me, this feels like one of those like power play something like Probably Russia asked China like flex somewhat, so like they would back off from me or something. I don't know. So NATO would back off, right? Doesn't threaten me much. Maybe Russia asked that and they did that. Like, okay, I guess it's like pointing a gun. You're not planning to shoot, you're just pointing a gun. So everybody just like back the fuck off or something. I don't know. It feels like that.
Position of airlift aircraft appears to be intended primarily to support the wartime requirements of air transportation as opposed to expeditionary air operations. What all of that means is that when we look at their airlift capabilities, they're entirely designed and focused on supporting a war against Taiwan or their near abroad. But just because strategic airlift isn't quite ready for Beijing, what other options might they have at their disposal? Let's take a look at ground transportation. The PLA could use the Trans-Siberian Railway. They would have to first load tanks and troops onto ships, then offload.
Oh yeah, I was about to say that. Isn't there a railroad or something connecting China, Russia and all the way to Belarus? Of course there is. I forgot about the Vladivostok and all that. China can go from there to Vladivostok to Moscow and like Belarus. I guess it's a long distance, but yeah, I mean, it's still there.
Them at Vladivostok before moving them by rail about 9,300 kilometers across Russia. And there's another overland option as well. This is the Chongqing Xinjiang European Railway. I think I said that correctly. God bless me. It takes about 16 days to travel the roughly 11,000 kilometers from China to Belarus through this route.
There you go. Like it's direct, right? This Chongqing railway is direct to Belarus. Look at that. You don't even need to use Vladivostok or something like that.
China needed to deploy troops into Europe, this is another potential overland route. However, it's already used by 30 trains each day for trade and economic activity from China.
I'm pretty sure they'll find a way to block all that, like if needed, right? Pressure Kazakhstan, Russia's already their side, like, okay, this railway is only to transport troops right now and can immediately do that. This feels like more realistic way. They're not going to use planes or something, probably going to use rail if they're going to transport troops.
China into Europe, so it would have to be some kind of cataclysmic, world-ending emergency event to see the potential militarization of these routes. The railway infrastructure is designed for cargo, not troop movements. There's also a lot of weight limitations on these tracks, and it would require some significant modifications to freight cars to pull off sending tanks and equipment, military variety through there. China would...
Yeah, the gauge of everything, yeah, like can it hold tanks and things? It might have to reinforced and that big of a rail. I think the signs would be there very early. Like China's doing something. I don't think they would want that, so yeah.
Also need to coordinate and get permission from Kazakhstan where their rail passes through. So there's also geopolitical concerns here. But it wouldn't be insurmountable because Kazakhstan and Russia and China are all founding members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is actually the group that Belarus just joined. So it's a big reason why these training exercises are happening in the first place. The active duty U.S. Army logistics officer that I spoke to had this to say about the railway route. This would allow the PLA to deploy more soldiers, more supplies, and even heavier equipment. This could work for a short training deployment, but would be wholly inadequate during a longer deployment and even worse during combat operations. The extreme distance between mainland China and Belarus would force the PLA to rely on a predictive style of resupply, push method, and not a responsive style, pull method. This would either overburden units with more rations, ammunition, and repair parts than they can consume.
That's the thing. When you're waging war at long distances, you need a strong navy. Ocean are the only thing that can be unpredictable, right? Railways and things are kind of hard. Again, Air Force, like if you're a strong Air Force, a lot of cargo planes, maybe. But even that is risky. Also, usually navies are the way to be dominant. That's why British Empire had the biggest navy and they were that dominant. US is really dominant because they're like a really strong navy. You need navy, right? Most of the place is like ocean. And you need ocean to be dominant.
Or, more likely, not enough. We already know in 2021, China sent troops, tanks, and equipment through rail into Russia. They were there to participate in the International Army Games, kind of like the Olympics, but for war. But they didn't go very far. They just traveled right across the border in the Mongolia Autonomous Region. There'd be all kinds of red tape and problems with trying to militarize a trade route, a railway like that. So what if China tried to go over sea instead? When it comes to China's sea lift capabilities, they have 3 Type 75 transport ships that can move 800 soldiers and 2 operational aircraft.
Yeah, see, I know the US is like littered around this place in many like islands and things. US is really like strong there. So it would be problematic to use that area. There's also India there, right? Like not as strong as China or USA in like navy wise, but geographically it's just like strong enough. So using this to be, I think it's going to be a problem. I think, like railway or air, that is the only option left if they were to do something in Europe.
Aircraft carriers. But there isn't really a route that they could take to Europe, because going east to the Bering Strait through there wouldn't really work since the Arctic Ocean isn't navigable most of the year. It's not impossible, but it's unlikely Turkey would allow China to transport troops through the Bosphorus River that they control. The CCP currently doesn't have a blue water navy or the foreign relationships necessary to transport soldiers that far away. But supporting soldiers abroad is about much more than just getting them there. You have to be able to send spare parts for when the vehicles break down. You got to be able to send fuel, tools, food, and ammunition thousands of miles away too. Loading and unloading, sending all of this is called railhead operations. The railhead operations are dangerous, time-consuming, and an all-around nightmare. Conducting them requires an enormous amount of training, skill, and specific transportation equipment. It's nothing like riding a bike. Once you do it, you need to continue to do it and train on it to be able to do it correctly, even with practicing these things all the time. Between 2006 and 2018, 31% of active duty US military deaths were results of accidents on things like these kind of transportation operations. It would take 2 months at least to move a similar size 2 brigades this method, especially without any of the infrastructure or training ahead of time. But China will continue to grow.
Obviously it makes sense. There's a saying where I live, right? The labor is higher than the cost of gold, basically. So when you make a jewelry, it's much more costlier than even the gold would be because labor is that higher, which is like, I mean, come on. So that is so insane. Like if you're trying to do something, just like simple logistics are too much to handle. Like that's a problem. I can see why China has no plans for that, because I don't think even if they tried it, there would be too much to do. Like why do it though? Right? Like I said, they're just like flexing right now to back NATO off or something. Some deal with Russia or something, I don't know.
Grow their power projection abilities. In 2016, Zhu Qin of the Aviation Industry Corporation of China stated that they needed more than 1,000 of the Y-20s, and it's likely China will have 100 of them by 2032. In order to match the United States airlift capabilities, though, they would need well over 230 of them and another 100 refuelers.
What about spare parts and things, though?
These capabilities by 2035 or 2040 seems to be on track with the rate at which the CCP is producing transport aircraft. But I'm curious to know what you think of my assessment. Was there a transportation route or outside-the-box method that you can think of that I missed? Do I have my head really far up my ass? And be sure to check out one of these videos.
Yeah, look, if China wants to do something, like I said, if China wants to do something, they can. Like, they're known to build shit faster. They can even create the whole new railway if need be. But why would they need be? Why would that be their top priority? Like, Europe is not direct threat to them, right? So I don't think that's ever going to happen. But yeah, this railroad thing, like airlift thing, yeah. And even if their new cargo planes are as much as like US, would they have like same logistics like US have, like same like spare parts, like things in play, like workshops that can repair things at that level? Would they all be there like US has? Who knows? But yeah. Right, well, that was Chinese troops deployed to Poland's border by general task and purpose. If you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.